There's a real buzz in helping founders. And when you lose your ability to help them in more than just capital, then I think for me, that isn't going to be the right legacy for me. So for me, it's really, really important to help founders more than just bringing the capital.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, I'm joined by Pooja Sikka, General Partner at KHP Ventures, a collaboration between King's College London, King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. Pooja's CV is nothing short of impressive, and her route into VC was more of a squiggly one. Pooja has over 20 years of experience working in healthcare and still continues to practice as a GP today. Pooja's first step into her investment career was when she set up EY's corporate venture initiative. She also set up a health tech VC firm, which was acquired by Octopus Ventures, but it was when she worked as a venture partner at Apex Ventures, cross-border impact ventures, that she learnt what kind of healthcare VC she wanted to be. Fast forward to today, and Pooja is now general partner at KHP Ventures, the only VC firm backed by the NHS. It also launched the first dedicated mental health fund in partnership with the NHS. With such a squiggly career, there's lots for us to dive into in today's episode, but I'm especially excited to hear more about her insights and perspectives on healthcare and health tech, and to find out more about KHP's new mental health immersion program. So Pooja, a huge warm welcome to 40-Minute Mentor. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for being with us today. I'm really excited to dive into your career and here, which has been a really diverse and super interesting one. But before we get to that, we're going to warm you up with some quickfire questions so our audience can get to know you a bit better. So please finish the following sentences after me. The best career decision I ever made was...
Taking roles and not thinking about it too much.
I like that. Would you say in your life in general, you are the sort of person that just does things spontaneously?
100%. I think my career into venture capital was almost by accident. I was sitting in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel in London with my 6-month-old on my lap, speaking to my then emerging fund partner. We were deciding whether to be fund partners and kind of going, yeah, you know what? I've got a trip to Hong Kong to see family. And when I'm back, let's do this.
Love it. Well, we'll get on to that in more detail in a minute, but thank you. The hardest lesson I've learned as a VC is...
I mean, to be quite truthful, I think venture capital is made of all sorts. And by that, I mean that people have come from lots of different backgrounds and different skills. Probably the lesson for me is how you bring those skills together and how you work with other VCs on a board and really be very complementary. And for me, being such a specialist in healthcare, that's been quite the learning curve, a really exciting way to develop my career.
Love that. Thank you. One misconception about VC I'd love to correct is...
VC is a bit like dating. So I think that when VCs say, and I try not to do this to be honest, yes, let's keep in touch, that is a no. If that let's keep in touch is followed by something actionable after, then that's probably genuine. But let's keep in touch means there's no fit here. But I don't want to miss out just in case you happen to be the unicorn.
Tips. Yeah. Okay, classic. And the biggest shift I see coming in VC is...
Look, it's got to be AI and foundational models. I think without a shadow of doubt, we're at this pinnacle, and you can look at that very negatively, but I think most people are looking at it very positively. There is work to do around the ethics of it. There is work to do around how we ensure that we don't get overly biased data. But I think we're also into it. It isn't just the few now. And that should mean that we will guardianship the way that it's developed. And particularly that's going to be really important for healthcare.
Mm. Great. Thank you so much. Well, we've warmed you up nicely there, Pooja. We're going to dive into all things your career, but we're going to start at the beginning, as we always like to. I'd love to get a sense of what your upbringing was like. What did you want to be when you were younger, and how has all of that shaped the person and leader you've become today?
I mean, my story is not that dissimilar, to first generation British Indians or British Asians. My family really wanted me to succeed. They had pretty much made the decision that I was going to be a doctor before I knew it. And I appreciate that, actually. I think there are probably moments in my 20s and 30s, and maybe as I was coming out of my clinical work, I, somewhat resented, why did I have to go through this route to kind of get where I am, and look at other people, they're ahead of me and they understand this. But actually it's given me my ninja powers in the end. And for families that came from India and set up shop here and they hustled, they didn't want that for their kids. So a lot of my upbringing was about success and excelling academically, but it was a paradox. Like, there were elements of it that was disciplined and strict, and you used to get in the car and my dad would be like, "What was your grade?" And, it was good grade. And "What did your friend get?" Well, she got percent higher than me. So very typical sort of thing. But the paradox was that I always had the freedom to decide how to get there. It wasn't overly managed or staged or pushed. And that made me really independent and self reliant. And so I appreciate that. I am a workhorse. Like, I love work, and I will openly admit to my bad habits, which is working on holiday. But I find that I need kind of 72 hours of complete utter chill, and then I'm itching to see what's in my inbox, itching to reply to people, itching to check everything's all right. And I'm sure my upbringing has had something to do with that. Probably the other thing to say is that my father is a serial entrepreneur and my mother is a serial public servant. She did do some private industry work, but she primarily worked in those kinds of jobs. And that's the making of me. I really thought hard about why I've ended up in venture capital. And I've seen that in healthcare, bringing private capital to public services is really the magic for me. And that's really defined my position as a VC.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. And I'm sure there are lots of people listening to this that will be nodding along with your childhood experience. My father came from India to England in the late 50s. And, him and his siblings, there's two accountants, there's one lawyer, there's one engineer. And some of these traits definitely filter through to the next generation as well, I think. But yeah, very relatable. And you can clearly see, how that set you up for the rest of your career, which has been hugely successful and really diverse, which is we're going to come on to. You trained as a doctor and to this day are still a practicing GP. I appreciate it's not the core part of your working life now, but clearly there's a deep passion for all things healthcare and medicine. So where did that come from? I'd love to learn a bit more about where that was sparked.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of family in healthcare, and as I said, it was, sort of, and it is for kids now. They're making those decisions pretty early because of the way that the pressure to get into medical school. But why do I still do clinical work? I mean, it just kind of keeps it real for me. I have to say I still enjoy it. And we have to admit that the pressure right now in the NHS is really high. And I sometimes go in and I see my colleagues just completely exhausted. And I have to sometimes pretend that I'm not as happy and bouncy to be there, but I am. Like, it's a real joy. And even the things that might feel like they are draining and not, because of the amount that I do, I find it a real joy. It's real lives, it's real people, it's the one person at a time reward. And it's listening to their stories and how life is, and it keeps you connected. I think you can float around your corporate and financial services jobs and never really understand what this country is built on. And it's a real privilege sometimes to be able to see the window into that. And not only that, to be helpful.
Yeah, that's really well put, and I guess you're having a real impact on people's lives, and yeah, I guess it must be lovely to be able to still do that from time to time. So I have members of the family, my family, that work in the NHS as a nurse, and my sister-in-law's a doctor, and yes, it's definitely a very tough place to work, and there's a huge pressure, but you still are it's still so impactful, isn't it? It's so important, and we all owe those people so much. So thanks for sharing. Speaking of your experience as a doctor, I'd love to hear what those early years were like in the NHS, and I guess why you ultimately decided to transition out of the industry and into management consulting.
Yeah, really good question. So it was hard. It was hard. You kind of go from a lecture theatre to a ward overnight. And it's really tough because I think initially you don't know what you're doing, but you are kind of guided, and it's high speed, high pace, high pressure. But it's the making of you. That's the making of you. And those are the moments that define who you want to be as you become a clinician. And I had always thought actually in those early years that I would remain a clinician, and had decided, fairly early on that I wanted to be a general practitioner because it had that small business environment actually. So in my heart, I always felt a little bit entrepreneurial, and that's why I wanted to be there. But I found it deeply frustrating as well. I found the bureaucracy deeply frustrating. I found the admin, the fact that you just couldn't automate things. And, I suppose one way or another, I wanted to be part of that future. And I did an MBA, which completely widened my viewpoint on everything. I would say that I had a very clinical, typical kind of medical. For that time, I think things have changed and people are much broader in their knowledge now. And the MBA really helped me to broaden my views, meet different kinds of people, and flourish in that sense. And had always been in a family, was entrepreneurial. So it was a really good fit for me. And then I decided off the back of that a good structure would be to go into management consultancy. And I like the idea of helping the healthcare service from a different lens.
I love it. And yeah, you clearly had a very successful time in consulting, but you've had this sort of a very interesting squiggly career that ended up in venture. So from the NHS to EY, setting up the venture team there, which I guess was a foray into investing, and then you joined Octopus Ventures, which is obviously a very well respected VC fund. So tell us a bit more about, and you are on our VC feature series, so it's where we're going to spend most of our time. So how did you end up there? Sounds like the Hilton Hotel had something to do with it. And would love to learn a bit more about that and how you think your career leading up to that point helped you with that transition.
Squiggly is a very great way to describe it. And all I can say is that I was just open to opportunity, and that ultimately I believe in entrepreneurship. So, and that was always a bit of a feature of my career. And that's probably the bit that has made me push me into venture capital and made me really enticed by it. There's a real buzz in helping founders. And when you lose your ability to help them in more than just capital, then I think for me, that isn't going to be the right legacy for me. So for me, it's really, really important to help founders more than just bringing the capital. Of course, that's the core of the job. And also to decide whether you will follow in, and how you help them to kind of find other sources of capital as well, and co-investors. But really being fundamentally helpful is the probably the principle of my career. And as a consultant, you do that day in, day out, and actually step back a lot. Sometimes you might be the person doing all the work in the background, assimilating it and pull it together and taking instructions from your clients, but it's for them to shine. And that's a really sort of, if you look at all of the patterns between how you help people as a doctor to how you help people as a management consultant. In fact, there is a model in management consultancy which is the doctor patient relationship. And then how you move into VC, it is all about helping people to shine and helping people to grow. And of course, there is a reward in that for yourself, but that's the nature of the work. And so that's how I meandered in it. I mean, what was the route in? I was doing sort of what you'd think as normal implementation focused consulting at EY. Then I went off and was seconded to NHS England to do some more strategic kind of work there, which was the precursor to integrated care systems. And then I went back into EY, and they were setting up a corporate venture practice and asked me to help lead the healthcare part of it. And so that's how my sort of opening into investment came, and then eventually decided to leave and go independent with another colleague. And so when that decision happened, we were at the Hilton opposite More London, where the EY offices are, and the rest is history.
Amazing. And I guess I'd love to hear what you found the most challenging part of that transition into becoming an investor, or perhaps the most surprising.
Definitely, it's a transition into financial services. I think that that's underappreciated in the sector, and for any sort of medics thinking about going into VC, that's probably my top tip, which is you've got to understand the mechanics of investing and the mechanics of the finances of growing businesses, and really understand growth of companies and where it goes, because that's how you become a good investor. Not It's actually very difficult to pick out the best in front of you. Some LPs would probably say, it's a bit of a guessing game, you don't really know. And then some are really looking for those characteristics. The jury is out. Are you lucky, or are you a really good finance professional? When you look at VC and fund performance, there are some characteristics that I think are coming out, but that's never been that clear to see, actually.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I guess you ended up joining KHP Ventures, I think originally in 2022, and became general partner in 2024. So can you share a bit more about KHP and what stood out most to you about this fund?
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about people and their values. And I think fundamentally, as a firm, our values are very much aligned to ensuring that the NHS becomes the strongest that it can. That is our kind of fundamentally what's in our hearts. And so that's how the firm has been built. And I think that's what attracted me in kind of right at the beginning, when my partners were like, look, come and talk to us about how you think we can set this up. That really struck me, that this is built on that foundation. And even today, that's how we are. We are looking for things that are really going to support. But within that, there is something about sustainability and competitiveness. And, as a fund, we're no different in that sense. We want to find those category defining technologies. We want to be helpful to them. But I think we also recognize that it's really difficult to scale in the NHS, and that makes it sustainable. And actually, being sustainable in terms of financially sustainable means that you are sustainable by impact, by definition, in my view. And I think a lot of impact investors think like that. And so that's our key differentiation. We really want our founders to succeed in the UK. We do everything in our power to kind of structurally design that. And we've gone one step further with the fund, the Innovations and Mental Health Fund. And that's what attracted me to KHP Ventures and being part of the fabric of building that.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a perfect match given your background and interests. And how have you seen the healthcare sector develop and sort of become more innovative since you trained to become a doctor? I'd love to hear your observations on that and where you think the biggest opportunities, but also where the biggest gaps are still today.
Yeah, I think that the NHS has started to trust technology, and that was a real gap when I was training. It's not to say that there was always good tech about, but things were starting to emerge. And I think there's been really great, and you can say this about the UK and you can say this about the US probably, is that when clinicians got the bandwidth to be part of the story, that's when the trust really started to flourish, and the advocacy for technology. And now we're beyond that. So, I think there's definitely an acceleration because of COVID. But I think there was this natural thing that was happening, is that more people were getting curious, not just clinicians, but also health managers as well. There's also the element of pressure. The more pressure you put on a system, the more it wants to define itself by innovation. and you needed some small successes, and those were kind of coming. And they're really small. They're often in the productivity kind of side of things rather than deep clinical. But, one would argue that robotic surgery, for example, is a deeply clinical and high risk technology, but that came too. So I think this is all about trust and advocacy, and AI will play the same curve. If we don't get that trust and advocacy right, and we don't build really superior products, but also think about the ethics and, as I mentioned, the data you put in, then the adoption curve will go down. But if we get that right, the adoption curve, I believe, will be faster. And this is our work, really.
Yeah, that's great. If you don't mind, for our listeners, sharing a bit more about your broader investment thesis and what for you really makes founders stand out to you, particularly if there's any health tech founders out there listening to this that ultimately want to impress.
So, in true fashion for me, I'm actually an investor in more than one fund. And so I have that kind of lens. So, at KHP Ventures, I run our Innovations in Mental Health Fund with Daniel Dickens. And I'm also a venture partner at Cross Border Impact Ventures, which is a large women and children's impact fund. I see deals across the pre seed to series A, B stage. What makes things stand out for me are, look, it's got to start with the people. If you don't click with the founders, you don't click with their story, it's not a good fit. And you know what? It's not a good fit for anyone, because when it gets tough, you need to, within that, find your professional friendship, I would say, because it does get tough. It gets really hard to raise. And if you don't click, it's not going to work. So you have to have that element of rapport with the founders right from the beginning. And I do sometimes liken VC to dating, that if you don't get that click right in the beginning, or by the second time you meet founders, it's kind of done and you're very unlikely to go back. You do get FOMO. So, and the founders that send FOMO style newsletters, I can't say that I'm immune to that. I do look at them. I find some of it very impressive, but it has to start with that relational piece, and you have to trust that that founder is going to be the visionary for this business for the long haul, or for at least a good chunk of the creation element of the business. So that's what you're initially looking for. But for me, I get into the more strategic end, think more strategically, is that how would my colleagues adopt this? And maybe that's a very early thing for me, because it's very easily visible. I don't always have to go out and check with 5 or 6 clinicians whether this thing is going to hit the mark or not. It's often in my wheelhouse to know whether it will or not. And then I'll use those reference calls as confirming or creating an added value. And then I'm looking for competitive edge or competitive advantage. And if you can't describe that very early on in your pitch, for me, that fits in. We've been talking to founders about this yesterday. That fits in 2 parts for me. Sometimes it's in the way you've built your business. It could be you've got some kind of advantage by your intellectual property. It could be that you've got some kind of advantage in the way you've created your product. And then it could just be an execution as well. It could be that you've hired a commercial officer with a track record, or you've got some particular unique element to your go-to-market strategy that puts you ahead of others or gives you a bit more time than others. So once you've gone into that sort of first kind of, I like you and I think you can build this business, then it very much goes into the company strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I guess once you have decided to invest in founders, how do you approach working with them? Clearly, you mentioned rapport being super important, but what can founders expect from having you on the cap table or alongside them on this roller coaster journey that startup life is?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about supporting their traction. Of course, there's elements of the board and the strategy which I really, really enjoy. But I'll often be saying to founders, hey, let's get in a room, let's work that up, let's workshop this. I go sometimes almost into that consulting advisory mode pretty quickly to say, let's work through the challenges. Here's all the barriers and hurdles to working in this health system and that health system. Think quickly about how you might want to go into another geography. And often that geography is the US, but I also getting to know the Middle East market. I know the Indian market somewhat as well through a family business. And so we can have these these are the kinds of conversations that I can have with them, and really about that kind of post-regulatory, pre-commercial to commercial stage is where I'm most useful. I kind of enjoy the whole journey, if I'm honest.
Yeah, sounds great. And are there particular things that you see founders struggling with, like a consistent theme across the portfolio? And I guess also, are there common mistakes you see them make? And I guess I'm asking this with a view to hopefully helping anyone listening to this going through this journey at the moment, maybe avoid some of those.
I mean, look, undoubtedly, it's going from your pre-commercial to your commercial, or from commercial to scale, because I think even then people are getting their first customers well. And then it's going into what is your pricing strategy and how are you going to do sales at scale, and working with the NHS, working with health insurers, working with employers one by one. It's all really hard yards, and that is the hard work. And that's where I'd love to support founders and continue to do so. In terms of mistakes, I think people are getting better at this. I think companies are getting better, but it's things like not putting enough money aside for your intellectual property strategy, not thinking about that widely enough. I think the Middle East is a big player now in adopting health technology, and I think people are forgetting about those sorts of aspects as well, about intellectual property management and making those decisions early. And then hiring. Hiring is it. It is hiring. Like, you have to be able to spot talent, and you've got to also be able to sort of make decisions fairly quickly. If something's not working, you've got to intervene quickly, and you've got to have some rules about that, and you've got to warn people on their way in and be kind to people on their way out. So, how you are as you manage people is the job of a chief exec and the people around them. You're looking after your relationships at the board, looking after your relationships in the teams. Just key things, like, often I'm looking at, as companies are scaling, I'm often looking at those rules about how many people report into you. If 15 people report into you, you don't know how to delegate, right? Or you don't know how to structure a team. So it can get quite deep in due diligence, looking at how somebody kind of operates and how they hire. What's your hiring strategy? Are you really looking for impressive CVs, or are you looking for people that can eyeball you and say, hey, here's my black book. Here's how I've done this before. These are my numbers of accounts that I set up and supported before. And that's where I'm hoping that as our companies go from sort of seed to A to B, that they learn how to do that.
Yeah.
You'll have a view on this, James, I'm sure.
For sure. I mean, it really is the thing that makes and breaks companies, hiring and one, building strong cultures and retaining talent as well as attracting it. So it's also, for me, one of the biggest, and this is, I guess, we've been able to get some exceptional founders on this podcast who have done it very well. And you often can see the individuals that give it real thought, that know what it takes, and it does require selling. But the best talent in the market requires being sold to. And I think there's just, if you invest in it early, if you invest in people and talent early, and you're really thoughtful and considered about how you do it, you, not to say everyone should work with headhunters like us, but there are times when it really helps to bring in a professional executive search firm to help you, particularly when it comes to critical leadership hires, because you can't get a lot of these things wrong, and if you do, it can set you back, financially, and it's such a time drain. So yeah, I completely agree that hiring is often something that founders really need to work on, and I think it's a skill worth honing, actually, if it doesn't come naturally to you.
I also was going to say that I think there is if you're a great founder or a really interesting company, everyone's coming at you. Everyone wants to meet you. Everyone wants to, and that creates bias and noise. And actually being able to step away from that and saying, actually, what's the process? What are the skills I'm actually looking for? And boards are very good at helping companies to think that through, in my experience, and not to just jump on the next nearest person that said they've got a track record in doing that. So I definitely think that having a really great process is really good. And actually, I would say that about VC as well, having a really great hiring process, different needs and different ways of doing that. But one of the best hires I've made was at Octopus, and we had a blind process in terms of some of the diversity measures. And we had a really thorough kind of process around a case study and modeling things. And it was a really good process. And I highly admire that person. I won't mention her name, but she's one of the most inspirational people I've met in venture capital, and has gone on to opening her own massive fund. Just really delighted for her. And on the culture piece, what I would say is that I have a particular style I really like to spend time with people. It isn't for me all about just work. Of course, that comes into it. But I think for me, it's the going for the coffee with people in my team. It's the breaking bread with people and it's spending time in an office that I think sometimes you don't get just from virtual relationships. And that helps you to build a culture. That means that when the proverbial hits the fan, that you can all depend on each other, and you can muck in and you can roll up your sleeves and get through high pressure times and situations.
Yeah, totally. Some absolutely brilliant advice there. Thank you for sharing, Pooja. We need to come on to talk about KHP's new mental health fund and immersion program, which I am super excited to learn more about. So we'd love to hear about your experience of raising the fund and the program itself. Who's it for? What can founders expect by taking part?
Brilliant. Yeah, let's dive in. So it's called the Innovations in Mental Health Fund. We were delighted to be anchored by the Wellcome Trust, who, of course, have mental health as one of their top three themes of things that they fund. And really, this VC fund was to catalyze capital into mental health. And they have this thesis, which we share, that there will be a digital based mental health solution, and if not one, many, that will really support the demand in mental health. The TAM in depression, anxiety, psychosis, addictions, etc., is just so high. Half the globe is struggling with a mental health problem, and yet we really haven't brought the best of technology to that problem, and that's why we were set up. But we've done it in a really unique way, because we know that we're in very early stage. We understand the problems for founders, and so there are two really unique aspects to how we've set up the fund. So we're a pre-seed seed fund, but because of that, we really wanted to help founders very early in their journey. And so the way we have set up is that we run something called an immersion program. We take up to 15 companies every cohort. And we kind of deliberately don't call ourselves an accelerator, actually, because it is a very short, sharp period of time. But then we put all of the kind of information and support around founders, which gives us a chance to get to know them as well. But we've just launched our first cohort in December, brought them in for a 3-day residential, super intense, into London. Half of our companies were international. And now we're making some decisions on who we will go forward with for investment and who feels kind of ready. And then the second most unique thing about us is that every one of our portfolio companies will get a handheld relationship with an NHS trust. So that's South London and the Maudsley, which I think is Europe's largest mental health trust, and certainly the oldest mental health trust in the world in terms of kind of modern mental health as we think about it. And so that means that every founder can work with an NHS trust on whether it be accessing patients and departments, clinical and academic mentorship, and really solving this problem around real world evidence generation, really having the evidence to back these solutions. And I kind of describe it as something called clinical grade. But what that means is that clinicians feel comfortable that patients are going to access it and feel that it would really impact their mental health care. That doesn't mean that it needs to be prescribed by a clinician, but that it's got that level of kind of rigor behind it, that it's really doing that. And I think we share the notion with Wellcome that there are hundreds upon, maybe even thousands of really great, or even maybe really variable solutions out there. But now we need to move into the ones that really we can demonstrate, that clinical impact, clinical outcomes, but also return on investment.
Sounds amazing. And I guess, given your background as a doctor, you'll have seen the evolution of mental health, coming into the fore, I guess many years ago, it was something just was not spoken about enough. And it's great that now we have something like this, and startups really looking to bring innovation into the space, and for us all to talk about it and hopefully have a much bigger impact when it comes to supporting people with mental health. You launched the first cohort in December and have received hundreds of over 100 applications. So we'd love to hear what were some of the standout applications for you personally, and some of the highlights from how it's been going so far.
Well, I can't declare my favorites yet, so I'll canter you through the cohort. But honestly, you put something down on paper sometimes, and there's always that 1% of you thinking, gosh, is this going to work? Is it going to be as great as we thought? Is it going to be, from a VC perspective, a really incredible way to source and find high quality? But I can tell you that we've been deeply, deeply pleased with the quality of the applications that we got. 95% of them were within our thesis. They were within the wheelhouse. And then what we were doing was really sifting through them in a really rapid process just after Christmas to see what was venture backable. And you know what? There were some brilliant solutions in there where I think founders, if you're listening, don't stop what you're doing. Some of you are doing amazing things. It's just that it doesn't suit venture capital financing right now. And it's difficult to know whether it would scale to a kind of venture backable sort of, but that doesn't mean people can't be, medium-sized businesses for the UK. But the ones we did select, we thought could have international impact. And that was, kind of one of the key things. We thought they could jump geographies. From our intake, we were really surprised to have, I think it was 38% international companies. And then in our cohort, it was 50%. 50% of our companies were from outside of the UK, which meant that through our launch process, we got a lot of reach that we weren't really expecting. India, Nigeria, Singapore, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. We got a lot more reach than we thought we would get. So that was really great. And we've got a lot of work to do for our next cohort to do even more there. So in terms of the first cohort, we've got 14 companies. They range from companies that are consumer health focused or trying to face into employers, to precision psychiatry, to digital biomarkers, to VR, to ones that are doing deep research in sleep and other measures. And so we got this huge and vast kind of array of technology and opportunities in the cohort, each actually quite different. There's the sad part of me that sometimes wonders what would happen if you merged them all together into one giant mental health company. But perhaps someone in M&A is listening. That's where the future is, I'm sure, is going to be. And some of these companies are just building, really phenomenal technology. And I think it is a very, very hard choice, even in this first cohort, who to back. And we're working with them. At the moment, they're being assigned mentors. They've had some time with us. So we've got some fantastic mentors who have joined us to support the companies. And that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Sounds amazing, honestly. Huge congrats on that. And yeah, really excited for the companies involved and seeing the evolution of the program. I guess there are going to be people listening to this that will be excited by what they hear and potentially applying. So how does the application process actually work? And have you got any tips or tricks for anyone who will be sending an application in, just about how they can make that really impactful?
So we deliberately designed the process to be quick because we knew we were going to get lots of applications and we wanted to be agile. Plus, it was the holiday, so we very deliberately designed it. And so we'll have to see for our next cohort if we change it up. But I think we definitely want it to be a kind of really quick process. We asked some of the basic things, but a lot of the things we doubled down on were sort of team and experience. We doubled down on the evidence base that people could demonstrate, or the evidence that the literature supported. So a really good submission on some of the background, which is in keeping with kind of our investment thesis. And then we asked people to put in a pitch deck and a kind of 5-minute video of themselves, pitching their company. And I'll come to what didn't work. And then we gave people the option to have an advocate or a reference give a video. And actually, very few people took that up. But I thought that was for the ones who did it, and then their advocate came on and talked about the company, it made a difference. It's an extra bit of engagement that you can have.
That validation helps.
100%, 100%. You're trying to build trust and advocacy to go out and sell in the healthcare system. Having your advocates come and talk is a really great thing. So I would say for the next cohort, don't miss that opportunity to do that. And I would say that when you're looking at hundreds of applications and we're not functioning like a grant program where we've got 5 or 10 people looking at something, it's kind of me, myself, and Daniel and others in our team looking at stuff. So we wanted to make the process quick. The people who read off a script, nah, just don't do that. Like, give it a little bit. And I appreciate it was a pretty short turnaround, but I think it only takes 2 or 3 practices to get in and kind of pitch your thing appropriately, make your pitch really engaging. And we had a couple of people send a video where the CEO wasn't in the video. So kind of if the CEO can't turn up, then neither can I. So those are kind of my kind of top tips. Like, if you want to grab my attention, it's a trailer to your business and you've been given that opportunity. So that's really good. And then I would say it's about authenticity as well in the written application. So people who'd put really good detail, and then usual tricks. If you can make something easy to read and compelling and concise, bullet points, etc., that's kind of good. But ultimately, we know how to sift out the good companies where we think they are venture backable. Just don't miss the opportunity to talk about the market, maybe how you would approach the market, maybe any early traction that you have. We do accept founders who are really at conceptual stage. And even in the current cohort, we have people that are partway through incubating their idea. And that's totally fine. Just take us through your thought process.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing. Some great tips there for anyone that's going to be applying in the future. I hope we'll get lots of our listeners get involved. We're sadly at a close. We've got one final question before our final wrap-up questions. And I just wanted to ask, you are involved in, of course, KHP Ventures, cross-border impact ventures. You still do some work as a GP. I don't know how you manage all of these different things. So just practically, how do you keep all those plates spinning? And why do you still have so many things? Like, I think one of those would probably be enough for a lot of us. So what value do you find it gives you as an investor to have these different experiences? And I guess I'm particularly interested because we are seeing a lot of people in our networks sort of embrace portfolio careers. So I definitely think there's a real opportunity going forward. But I'd love to hear your personal experience of why you do it and why it's important to you.
So I'm got to start with being very fortunate to have a family that sort of accepts my way of life, as it were. I have a very understanding husband. That's not to say that we kind of haven't thought through and negotiate how things are going to work, but I need an element of flexibility, and I'm very lucky to have been able to kind of carve that. And I am a mum to a young one, he's 7, and I have to negotiate that in my own mind as well, that I'm okay with that. But he did say to me the other day, so when other parents read lovely children's books, I'm too tired sometimes. So we talk about founders, we put the lights off and we talk about companies. And he actually really loves talking about companies. He's really inspired by them. And he did say to me a few weeks ago that I'd love to work for you one day. And that is the biggest compliment, that you're getting it right. So that definitely kind of helps. Look, there's always a moment where you've got to decide, like, this really great opportunity has come and I just can't take it up because it's too much. And you have to do each one well, but you've also got to manage people's expectations as well. You don't take on roles and not tell people. Let's just say that I've not read a fictional book in about 10 years. And Daniel asked me yesterday, you always give quotes from Friends. And I was like, yeah, that's the thing I use to chill out. I either cook or I watch Friends because it's monotonous TV. I just, at the end of a hard day, that's all my brain can manage. But I love what I do. I absolutely live and breathe it. And when you love it, it really doesn't feel like a burden. And therefore you can feel able to spin plates. And that's why I do genuinely enjoy it. It absolutely energizes me. I'm super curious. I love learning. And this is the fastest way to learn.
It's a wonderful answer. And I think also incredibly reassuring for any founders that work with you, just how much passion and work goes into, because you really care. And I think that's a great thing to hear from an investor. And I really like the breadth of what you do as well. I think that probably gives you just different perspectives and insights, which I think will be even more powerful for your portfolio. So thank you so much for sharing, Pooja. It's been a really lovely chat. I've got two final questions for you. This is 40-minute mentor, so I have to ask, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
My answer to that's a bit odd, which is I'm at that stage where my mentorships are coming from what I would call professional friendships. I'm not really going out there to seek specific mentorship, although I've kind of got one goal in mind. And I'm really fortunate right now to be able to pick up the phone to a few people where we don't call it mentorship, but they know and I know it is. And I want to give a bit of a shout out to a gent called Simon Morris. He's the former chief creative officer of Amazon, worked at the top table there. And he's a kind of go-to person for advice. We've actually brought him on as a mentor into the Innovations in Mental Health Fund. That's how good a mentor he is. And he, alongside some of our other mentors, has really kind of inspired the cohort and has for me. What I would say about the people that mentor me is that they're very, very high integrity people, super high integrity. I've actually probably observed them pass up great opportunities or say and do the right thing over and above their own interest. And that when they're mentoring me, they think about that deeply as a very authentic way to support me. And that's the quality that I start with for mentorship. That's been really important.
Love that. And what final piece of advice would you like to leave our listeners with today?
So I want to, maybe it's International Women's Day tomorrow. So I want to kind of pay homage to International Women's Day. I feel deeply saddened about the amount of venture capital funding that's going into women. And I think that we've got to fight, us VCs have got to fight for these women to bring them to the table before they're pitching. I think they have to be at the table, understanding the commercials, understanding how to pitch the best that they can. Pitching is not even the right way to put it, to sort of show the best of them. We're not looking for the same characteristics amongst them. They don't need to act like men. They don't need to pretend they're not mums. They don't need to pretend like it isn't all spaghetti on the floor after school. Like, my advice is be your authentic self. It's our job to change that capital. We'll do it hand in hand with you. And it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be tomorrow, but it does have to happen. And there are a lot of female VCs, a lot of female investors that I really, really want to do this. And I don't just think it's up to the women either. I think a lot of men are stepping forward too in the industry. And so my advice is be your authentic self. Let's bring you to the table sooner. Let's give you that expertise and advice sooner. And I look forward to being part of your journeys.
It's a very important final note. So thank you so much for sharing that, Pooja. I wholeheartedly agree. And we've done our utmost on this podcast to really promote female founders, underrepresented founders, and similarly on the investing side as well, because it's just so important that there's more representation writing checks, but also just that everybody in this ecosystem is working towards changing this narrative that's just ridiculous, to be honest with you. And some of the very best founders I know are women, and it is just not talked about enough. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that will be just what a lot of our audience want to hear. And thank you so much for being such a great 40-minute mentor. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mental in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.